right, Ryan, here we are in the woods in Atlanta, Georgia, the land of Walking Dead. How you doing today?
Feeling great. Yeah, waking up here at Serenbe. It's quite an exquisite place. Definitely one of the big visions of my life is to live on land with community and creating a space to raise children and to demonstrate that we can live in a much more harmonious way in relationship to the earth. So to see a vision fulfilled in the way that Serenbe is, such that as much as I can see, it seems to be that. And so it's really a sweet thing to see a dream fulfilled, and to be here and to walk around the property and premise and the organic farm today with my little 17-year-old son, and just to feel the prana, the life of nature all around. Feels good.
It does feel good. I give a sigh of relief to that too. I always feel good when I get into the country. You know, as soon as I get away from mass civilization, my nervous system just turns down about 10 notches. I was talking to someone last night, and what's your favorite city? This is my favorite city. And they said, oh, I love London. And yeah, as far as cities go, London's cool. But if I had my choice to like get on a plane and go somewhere, it would, at this point in my life, never be a city. So I'm stoked to be here. And stoked to talk to you. Last time I saw you was at the Erewhon in Calabasas, and we had a brief but really engaging chat, and I've looked forward to diving deeper with you ever since. So let's go ahead and start off with your family of origin, your family business, the Café Gratitude empire and the ups and downs of that. I've sort of been watching it from afar and as a customer at the different locations. I think I've been to the one in LA, the Mission in San Francisco, and then at one point one in Healdsburg some years ago, which is right near where my mom lives. So being someone who's lived in LA 30 years and watching different organic and healthy restaurants kind of blossom, there was a point at which like the only sort of seemingly healthy food you could get were like fake meat vegan restaurants just made of soy and wheat products, which at the time seemed healthy. And then, you got some juice spots like you guys popped up and things like that. So I guess just kind of start there and give me a little origin story around how you and your family got involved in this. Beautiful.
So let's see. Going all the way back, my mother left my father when I was 20 years old, and she left him for another woman, and that was a kind of his life fell apart. And I did something called the Landmark Forum when I was 18, and I had always invited him to go do it, and he resisted it. And when his life fell apart, he said he was going to try something new because all of his tools in his tool belt weren't working, and he ended up going through it, loving it, having an amazing transformative experience of finding himself again, finding his feet on solid ground. And he ended up meeting a woman named Terces who was leading courses at Landmark, and they fell in love. And at that time, she was 54 and he was 45, and they said, all right, let's spend a year of our lives really looking at what we want to give birth to. And Terces had come through a 25 years of eating disorder and had lost her teeth, and it was
that's a long time.
It was a big huge deal, and her path of recovery brought her to many things, but one of the things was Landmark. And my dad had always been a spiritual seeker, and so when they got together, they really said, let's listen to our inner guidance and find out what wants to come through us. And they spent a year in contemplation, meditation, reflection, and what came through to them was to create a transformational board game which was ended up being called the Abounding River board game. And essentially it was a board game to shift our view from scarcity, not enoughness, to abundance, to gratitude. And they contracted an artist and created this beautiful board game. And that became the reason to open Café Gratitude. Was actually, they were, at the same time they were developing the game, they were also, we have a organic fruit and vegetable farm in Maui called La Lima, and they had a neighbor who was a total fanatical raw foodist at the time. This is late 90s, early 2000s. Late in the 90s, and they tried being raw for 30 days. They felt really great. They started having raw dinner parties and having people come over and play the board game. And they got challenged by one of their friends to, the way that you should get your game out there is create a restaurant, a cafe, invite people in with the carrot of food, and then you can give them this transformational view of gratitude and abundance while customers come in for a juice or a coffee. And so that was they had no restaurant experience. They were actually on their way to a yoga class, saw a lease for rent in San Francisco, 20th and Harrison in the Mission District in San Francisco, still kind of a seedy neighborhood. And they signed a lease, and they opened it with 14 employees, most of them family members. And the idea was that it was a raw food transformational gaming parlor in San Francisco. And every table in the restaurant had the game inset on the table, and we didn't have a stove, we didn't have a hood. It was all raw food. The only thing we had a miso broth and a quinoa cooker, or a rice cooker that we cooked quinoa in it, and that was the early days. And really, it was the idea was we're inviting people in to a new view of life. And that was the view that, in every moment, no matter what our circumstances are, there's always something we can be grateful for. And by doing that, it nows us, instead of being in the future trying to get something or regret in the past. It brings us into a state of fulfillment. And that was the desire. That was what we wanted to give people the presence of and access to. And so at the time, I was actually living in Los Angeles, and I had actually come through, me and my sister had opened a commercial recording studio in Los Angeles, in North Hollywood, and that kind of crashed and burned after the whole Napster thing. The music industry took a total tank. No one was buying music anymore. And so we ended up selling our recording studio, and I went from someone who had owning a recording studio and was totally on the scene in LA at 20 years old, running a commercial recording studio in the hip hop and R&B industry, to losing everything. We had to sell our house, sell our equipment, and then I was the host at Follow Your Heart, the vegan restaurant out in the valley in Canoga Park. And
oh yeah, I've been there.
It's a classic. It's been the same since the 70s.
Is that the one that's in the health food store?
Yeah, it's in the back.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was actually a big ego death moment where one of the a celebrity at the time from a young R&B hip hop group came in to Follow Your Heart, and I used to be the guy who ran the studio to now the guy brown bagging the to-go order, and I just remember that going just like totally just surrendering to this is what life looks like right now.
That's great. Stevia sweetened humble pie.
Totally. But yeah, so from that point, I had kind of a crash and burn in LA, a moment of losing my way, and I called my dad kind of in tears, just like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. And I wanted to know if I could come work with you, because they were just in the first probably 6 months of opening Café Gratitude, And I called them, went up, and the idea was that I was going to go to San Francisco to work with them and learn the business, with the hopes that I could come back within a year or two and open a restaurant in Los Angeles. And so I ended up doing that, but it ended up taking probably 5 years before it was 5 years before we ended up coming back to LA and opening the first of 7 restaurants in the Los Angeles area. So it was really the I think the thing that people probably didn't get about Café Gratitude was most restaurants start and their intention is really just to serve food, and even healthy food, but really our vision and mission was actually much more committed to the gratitude component than the cafe component, and that the way that was set up within our restaurants is we do things. We have something called a clearing, where we actually invite our staff, and we call them advocates, our employees, to go through a process called clearing, which is simply asking 2 questions, or sometimes can just be 1 question, and that question, if it's a 2-question clearing, it could be a question like, what are you pretending right now? Or where are you feeling insecure? And giving people an opportunity to check in with what is in their internal state so that they can get honest about it and bring some self-awareness to it. And then a second question could be something like, what are you grateful for? Or what do you love about your life? So you want to try the process?
Sure.
Okay. So
let's do it, because I wanted to ask you a bit about Landmark too. I was going to jump back to that. So this is a good segue into that, because when I was a kid, my mom did a bit of EST and that kind of stuff. So I was like, I wanted to learn the correlation, but yeah, let's do stuff.
Yeah, cool. So Luke, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So what's your biggest concern right now in life?
In the macrocosm of life?
Personally.
Not just in this moment, this weekend.
Yeah.
My biggest concern in life, I would say, oh man, it's funny, like nothing's coming to mind, but like if I wasn't asked the question, I would be constantly thinking about those things on some days. Concern in life, I would say, I'm very bothered by the fact that I pay someone else's mortgage, and I'm concerned about buying a house and not throwing cash down the toilet every month. Yeah, that's kind of what's on my mind. And that also includes finding a way to escape the clutches of Los Angeles after 30 years and still do what I do as effectively as I do. So it's kind of, the biggest concern is kind of the housing situation, where and the how.
Perfect. So what I heard you say is that your biggest concern right now in life, in the macrocosm, is this feeling of you don't want to be just throwing money down the drain, and how and where to buy a house. And if you do that, and if you're able to get yourself out of the clutches of Los Angeles, where would you go, and would you be still able to do effectively what you are doing right now in life? And the concern, if you can make all that happen.
Very good reflection. No wonder you have a lasting relationship. Your wife must love your ability to do that. I've found in relationship that when somebody really feels heard, especially females, it's very productive.
Yeah, I think
I like that style, that kind of imago type of communication, because so much is lost in the ambiguity of interpretation, right? Oh, so what you're saying is you're like afraid that you don't have enough money. No, I didn't say that. I'm just, it's the strategy, you know, so yeah, that's great. Okay, carry on.
Yeah. And so when your attention's on that story or on that idea that you're thinking about and mulling over in your head, what's the emotional experience that comes along when your attention's on that?
The emotional experience when my attention is on that is, I would say it's just a bit of tension and tightness, and it could be located, I would say, mostly in my chest. It's kind of like a sinking in, like, how am I going to do this? What's the answer? How's this going to work out? And so it's not really fear, because it's not that acute. It's not really anxiety, because it's not like a projected fear of being hurt or losing something or not getting something. It's just more of like a bit of a tension in the unknowing and the confusion. And
so tension, confusion, a little ambiguity, and you feel it, or it feels held in your chest.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think it's like it's a heart yearning to have a home and to do what I want to do with that home, and to have it be in a place that feels in alignment energetically. And so it's a yearning of like a heartache to have something that really feels like home. I think that's where the sort of tension of longingness comes from, and why it's probably in my heart.
Yeah,
so that's what I intuit.
Yeah, so there's a feeling of it's a heart's yearning for feeling that, experiencing that home, and that what you want to do with that home, and having that where it is being aligned. And so the feeling is somewhat the inability, or that there's not that heart. There's some constriction around the heart. Yes. Great. Thank you for sharing.
Maybe like a baby boa constrictor, not an anaconda, thankfully.
Yeah, the baby boa constrictor.
But we have these sort of unsolved riddles that sort of burn in the background, like when you have a bunch of apps open on your phone and it drains your battery. That would be one of mine. That's kind of like, it's fine, like it's not a problem that needs to be solved. It's just like, there's that thing, and so it's interesting.
a baby boa constrictor. I'm gonna use that.
Yeah, it's just kind of sliding around about the chest area, not really hugging too tight. It doesn't have that much power, but there's still a felt presence, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Beautiful. Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
What do you love about your life?
What I love about my life is that I get to spend a lot of time inspiring people and helping people. Yeah, I love that I have the impact that I have. However insignificant it might be in the grand scope of things, it's a meaningful contribution to me. Getting messages from people every single day that they're benefiting from the things that I'm sharing, I think that's probably what's most important.
Well, I'd love to acknowledge you for just the courage to show up and expose yourself and share in a way, because I know that if you're touching people, you're actually opening yourself up, and you're actually going beyond your comfort, and you're going beyond the mundane, and you're really sharing intimately with your audience. And I just want to acknowledge you for making your life about creating stories and creating narratives and weaving information that uplifts and inspires people. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for stepping into this role. It's really awesome.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So that would be considered a clearing.
Cool. God, it sure beats the hell out of small talk.
Yeah, it does.
How you doing today? Oh, good. It's traffic. It's it's like, I like intimacy, and I like relating on a deep level. I'm just someone, I want to really know. I think that's why I do what I do. I really want to know what's inside and not the facade of what we think people want to see. I find conversations, even brief ones like that, are more meaningful than talking to someone about the weather for 4 hours.
No, totally.
Yeah.
I've literally had moments where I think I'm crazy because I listen to the conversations that are happening all around, and I'm like, is this really all we talk about? I mean, it's like, I think sometimes I'm from another planet. I'm like, is that like everywhere we go, we just, it's, and it's actually one of the things there's this thing called council, sitting in council, where it's like a formatted conversation for community to commune and connect and understand each other, and it comes from kind of an indigenous lineage, and essentially it allows for people to sit and be heard, and the only rules of sitting in council is speak from the heart, listen from the heart, speak with brevity, and speak with spontaneity. And you kind of open up a conversation with a question. Everyone gets to have a moment of sharing, and then you close that conversation and open up another conversation. And just this beautiful, in a moment in my life where I was like really seeking for more meaningful conversation, it was really a beautiful thing to find to be able to sit in a circle of people having a conversation that was like, wow, I can tell that human being is, really there sharing from their heart. And so, yeah, and back to acknowledging you, I really appreciate that. And I think, in this moment, I'm just getting this now moment that I feel maybe that the reason for the whole podcast space phenomenon is that it has become a space where there is more meaningful conversations happening, which we're longing to be a part of. And so
I think you're absolutely right. It's an exciting time in terms of independent media right now, although there are ominous signs of repression and censorship upon us. Not even signs. I mean, it's happening, unfortunately. But right now, for the most part, within the space of podcasting, I think we have more freedom than other forms of media. I mean, perhaps you could have a blog and you could write the craziest shit you ever can think of, and then people would leave you alone. But YouTube's pretty heavily censored, and Facebook's heavily censored. Google in general is rigged, and so podcasts are kind of like the last place, I think, unless you're Alex Jones. He's the only person I've known to be banned from iTunes on a podcast, which is a travesty for everyone's free speech. It's kind of that's where the downward slide always begins, when any society demonizes and silences one person because they can judge them as wrong, then it's, it gets dangerous for the rest of us that are wanting to touch upon anything that's mildly controversial. But to your point, I think it's still a really exciting time because you can have a show like this and like thousands of others where you can have deep and meaningful conversations about whatever you want with whomever you want. And we're not beholden to the monetization element of that media. And I think in podcasts, that's the case probably in any other form of media, because even in YouTube, it's like, they have very strict rules about what you can talk about and what you can't. And they, blacklist you and demonetize your page if you do anything controversial, which used to be just political. That's where they started it. And then now it's moved into the kind of battle between medical and big pharma and alternative health, and you see a lot of people getting banned. But on podcasts, my advertisers don't seem to care what I talk about. And if they said, oh, I don't want you to talk about, I won't use the V word because I could get banned, but immunizations, we don't want you to talk about that, or circumcision, or some of the somewhat controversial things that I've covered on the show because I feel it's important. If my advertiser said we're not going to pay your fees if you talk about this or that, then I wouldn't work with them and I would just do it for free. Or I'd find someone that paid less, or, whatever.
Yeah.
So, my Optics, Four Sigmatic. I mean, all the great companies that support the show and my staff and all that, they love what I talk about. They don't care. They're probably like, yeah, the deeper the conversations, and even sometimes the more controversial perhaps they are, the better, because it's opening minds, and those open minds are actually going to be more receptive to trying a new product or service, that maybe they are not familiar with. So yeah, it's fucking awesome. And also the fact that we don't have, for the most part with podcasts, you don't have a time limit. And I remember when I first started, I thought, well, how do you do a podcast? Okay, well, you have to, find a guest, you have to find a topic, you kind of have to make a genre that you want to stay within to some degree. And then you have to have like a schedule every week of what day it comes out. And then you have to time it, right? So I thought, well, I'll make them an hour. And I think the first few, I would kind of like be watching the clock. Okay, we're almost at an hour, and I'd wrap it up, But then I started getting into these conversations that would just get so deep and so profoundly meaningful to me, just forgetting about the mics and cameras. But I'm just going, oh my God, I'm benefiting so much. I'm having these awakenings in conversations. And then next thing you know, they'd be going like 90 minutes, 2 hours, and some of them gone like 3.5 hours. And I don't want them to, because I don't think people probably have the time to listen to something 3.5 hours long. But I also just can't cut it off, because it's like, you don't know if that same magic is going to align next time. So say you and I go and we're like an hour in, and I'm like, okay, there's 10 other things I wanted to cover with Ryland. I'll just do that next time we record. Even if we do get around to doing like a part 2 or a follow-up, we're going to be in a different place, and those juicy nuggets would have been missed, the missed opportunity. So it's a overly long response to your question, because I'm so enthusiastic about what I get to do, and the fact that for right now, at this moment in time, on podcasts, we do have a lot of freedom in terms of what we can say, which is great. And I'm hopeful that someone will stand up for the First Amendment soon. I mean, I do what I can to spread awareness by talking about these issues. Some people don't even realize, David Wolf was just banned from Facebook. David Wolf is just like a dude that talks about health food. And
the flat earth.
Yeah. But I mean,
I love David.
Yeah. But like, he's not doing anyone any harm, like,
totally not. He's a great human being.
There's alternative treatments for it's probably something to have to do with cancer, vaccines, or something like that. But it's a terrifying time when you on a social platform where they operate under the guise that they're a private company, therefore can't be regulated, and they can have who they want and who they don't want on their platform. It's really slippery slope, because then even if you're like, oh, David Wolf, that nutty hippie, the flat earther guy, whatever, who cares if they kick him off? Well, they're coming for your channel next.
Yeah, that's right.
Unless you toe the line and, in this Orwellian totalitarian regime that's kind of being created with our mainstream media and big tech. Unless you fall within those guidelines and, don't step out of line, you could be next. So it's gnarly. I mean, I try not to change the people I talk to or what we talk about, but I am a little more mindful now, because it's not only like your mission, purpose, and job as a content creator like me, but it's like how I buy my Cheerios, you know what I'm saying? So I guess you just find something else if you get nuked, but I really, I feel, and I will, I'll adapt. I've had a lot of different jobs, I'd find a new job if like iTunes says, oh, you can't talk about natural healing or spirituality or, psychedelics or whatever weird things I might talk about. So anyway, here we are. We can do whatever the hell we want. But I want to go back to
let's go back. Okay.
To Landmark Forum, because I went to, I think, a one-day Landmark thing down in a hotel by LAX maybe 10 years ago or something, because I'm just a seeker, and anything I find out about that is going to help you, I'll go to. And I was playing in a band with a guy who had been through a lot of the programming, and it seemed to really help him. And so when I went, I somehow connected the dots that this was somehow in the lineage of Werner Erhard, the founder of EST, which was really big in the 70s, as far as I recall. And my mom was always talking about EST says this and EST says that, and I think she had done some of the seminars. So it was an interesting correlation to find, like, oh, because I always wondered what happened to EST. It was such a thing. And then maybe if I have the history right, which we'll find out, it morphed into this other thing. And tell me a bit about that, and then what it was like integrating that into your business as you described. And was there blowback from any employees that did not want to be part of that or thought it was culty or didn't have any framework by which to contextualize those types of conversations and that type of company culture.
Yeah. So I did the Landmark Forum when I was 18 years old in New York City, actually on the 14th floor of the World Trade Towers before they fell, a few years before they fell. And it was an amazing, I explicitly remember I took a Greyhound up there and I walked around New York City 2 hours. I'm from Ithaca, New York, so kind of upstate New York boy, country boy coming into the city, and I had this idea that if I looked like I didn't know where I was going, what I was doing, I'd be taken advantage of. So I had this fear walking around New York City trying to figure out where to go. It was pre every smartphones and so I walked around for 2 hours, not wanting to ask for direction because I was afraid that I'd be taken advantage of. Finally asked a police officer and got to where I was going. And I did this 3-day course, again, on the 14th floor. And it was everybody from Wall Street bankers to, kids from the Puerto Rican kids from the South Bronx to soccer moms. It was really to rabbis to, it was just a really eclectic group of people. And I had a really profound insight, which was that everybody is afraid of everybody else and that we're all pretending like we know what we're doing and we're all just making it up. And everybody is having that on some subtle level, that experience. And when I got, oh my God, everybody is just afraid of everybody else. And it gave me this freedom and this ability to be a little bit more loose in the world and play outside of my confines, which was so, I graduated high school reading at a 5th grade level. I had, attention deficit disorder, dyslexia. I was in the resource room all throughout high school. And I didn't go to college because I thought I was stupid. I thought I didn't have the capacity to, pursue higher education. And so when I had this realization that everybody was afraid of everybody else and everybody was pretending like they knew what they were doing, but really they were just making it up, it created a new view that actually gave me some freedom to start playing and trying things that in my construct of not in, I could see that I had labeled things that I was not interested in because that was actually just a creative way for my mind to label things that I was actually afraid of or felt like I was insecure or insignificant or didn't have the skill set to pursue. And so, just that really just opened me up to, wow, anything is possible. I really had an experience of seeing my limitation and seeing the possibility beyond my story and my limitation. And I've probably personally throughout my life put maybe 200, 300, 400, 500 people through the courses. And, nothing's perfect, but as far as what people can break through in 3 days and an evening, as far as the mental constructs, our past dictating, our future, I've never seen something more powerfully have people, create a new relationship with parents that they've been estranged from or broken from, or, abuse, addiction, dysfunction. So that I've just saw unbelievable. And then just people who lived their lives from a moment of trauma, and they see that their lives have been completely shaped because that one moment, then getting, oh wow, I'm living my life based on the decision of a 7-year-old, and like the sky is blue, I now know that I don't have to be who I was, 3 days ago. And I've just seen remarkable results. And again, my dad had, a big realization after my mom left him, which led to his marriage with Terces, and a lot of that, the technology or the sort of the psychological ideas and constructs. And again, Landmark is, it was an evolution of Est, and Warner Engelhart was the founder, and then I think it became owned by the employees that were original working with Warner and Est. But yeah, we never had any official tie with Landmark, but people definitely, we once got a little heavy-handed in telling all of our managers, if you wanted to be a manager, you have to go through Landmark Forum. And, people wanted to become a manager, but they didn't want to go through that. And because we were somewhat eager beaver about it, it landed a little heavy-handed. And I think, in the Bay Area, we had some controversial news coming out about that we were, people have talked about Café Gratitude as a cult, a few times over the years, just, based on the spiritual nature of our business, that, the way you order food is by saying an I am affirmation, that we have questions of the day that we're not only serving you food, we're inviting. And in the early days, we were a little bit more radical in that, we were a little more in your face, like, so what are you grateful for today? And I'm going to stand here and wait for you to share your answer versus like, you can't ask me that. You're serving. No, that's part of the deal here is, we engage. I'll share you what I'm grateful. I'll share with you what I'm grateful for. And we were definitely, were pushing the edge of, wanting people to experience some discomfort, because we, at the time really saw that, comfort is a sedative. We're not growing when we're just kind of in a sedated, comfortable state. And so we were wanting to instigate and disrupt and have new conversations. If we just sit over dinner and talk about the weather, but if there's a conversation of what moves you from your head to your heart, posited into the interaction, that actually can stimulate a new, more meaningful, transformative, healing conversation. And we were committed to that. And we wanted to, the bigger vision was, we want gratitude to be in culture. Like the question of what are you grateful for, as a normal question that we ask each other. What are you grateful for today? As like, yeah, let's lean into that.
That's so much. It's going to get such a better net result than how you doing? What's up? What's new?
Totally.
It's like if you just go, what's going on to someone, because of the negativity bias, unless you've worked really hard to overcome that through all the modalities that are successful in so doing, your automatic response is going to be like, fuck, man, my alarm didn't go off, the thing, then she said this, he said this, it's kind of just like we're wired to look for what's wrong. Evolutionarily, I think really because in our environment, take away civilization, in our environment, we're constantly looking for what's wrong or what we can eat, right? And so now there's really nothing to be afraid of. We're indoors. There's no predation. We're safe. But the mind, still that ancient mammalian brain of ours, or reptilian brain, or maybe both, is going to automatically kind of look for what's wrong. So it's a good NLP sort of trick to psychologically trick your default mode into going, oh wait, there are actually a bunch of things. And I like what you were saying earlier about that there's always something to be grateful for too. And I find that's a really useful kind of spot check tool right in the moment. And I used it the other night, a couple nights ago when I flew into Atlanta here, because I had arrived to the airport in not enough time for Delta to get my bag on the flight. Those a-holes at Delta lost my bag. And so when I got to the airport in Atlanta, and this never they never lose my bag. I'm always kind of like wondering if that's a real thing because people complain about it a lot. I've been very lucky, and my bags are heavy and they are expensive, son. Like the shit I keep in my luggage is like all my tools and
gear.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a normal person's suitcase at all. I'm working on it. But anyway, so I get a text from Delta. Oh, your bag's in LA still. And of course, that first thought is like, those assholes. Second thought is, Luke, you arrived to the airport in LA, a massive clusterfuck of an airport, 1 hour exactly before your flight left. That's not enough time. So it's your bad. Don't blame yourself, but let's just be honest. Get out of the victim mode. But then the very next thought was, because of the forced habit over the years, was like, oh, thank God I have my carry-on that has a bunch of really important stuff, and I have my backpack. Oh man, it's so awesome. I have my laptop, and I have all my recording gear, with the exception of half of a tripod that was in the big suitcase. But my mind went to first, like, what is still right instead of what's wrong, and then walking up to the line to go talk to the people in the baggage. I wanted to be mad at someone back there, just vent on an innocent person just to punish them and feel better myself. I saw that thought come up and I was like, nope, not having that. And I just put on a big smile and opened my heart and walked up to the lady, and she's defensive, waiting for an angry, annoyed person because she's probably had 150 of them in her face that day. And I just said, hey, how are you doing? And I was just super happy. She probably thought I was a mental patient, because I'm just like, I'm just blissed out because, my bag's missing and I'm tired and it's late. And, I could see her transform. Her energy just went like into receptivity because of that. Just a micro adjustment in my own attitude through that self-awareness. And, was I stoked to not have my bag? No. Was it supposed to show up at 11 and then didn't show up till 3:30 in the morning? Yeah. It wasn't a perfect transaction, but I had all the shit I needed, and it's like that experience was whatever my mind was going to make it, and I just had a little exertion of will available to me and a little awareness to transmute it into like not that big of a deal. But that's just from like thinking, well, what can I be grateful for right now? And that knee-jerk reaction of like, well, I have that bag and I have that bag. What's in them? Oh, this cool thing, that cool thing. And then it was like, okay, And then I thought I was missing a toothbrush, and I ended up finding my backup toothbrush in my carry-on, because that's the shit you don't want to. You got to have your toothbrush. Like all the rest of that garbage is whatever. But man, anyway. I digress. I need to reach across the room and grab my coffee because I felt like I was getting too hyper to finish it. But now I feel too relaxed. And so I'm going to find that poor man's speedball of caffeine and CBD. So what I want to talk to you about now is let's divert from historical context. Thank you for that. Got that. Where are the businesses at right now? Like you mentioned, you had 7 in LA at some point, which I didn't realize. I only been to the Venice one and the Larchmont one. How many are there in LA, West Coast right now? Because I know a couple have closed and open and whatnot.
Yeah. So we have right now we have a Gracias Madre in San Francisco. That's the original one that we opened down there, or up there. And then we have in LA, we have 7. We have Gracias Madre in West Hollywood.
I went there for brunch just about 6 days ago.
Awesome. And then we're opening a new Gracias Madre in Orange County, in Newport Beach on the 15th of this month. So that's opening. We actually closed down a Gratitude that was down there when we're reopening as a Gracias Madre. And then we have 4 Café Gratitudes in Southern California, 1 in Venice, 1 in downtown LA, 1 on Larchmont, and then 1 in San Diego. And then our one final kind of anomaly restaurant that's a little outside of those 2 it's called Gratitude, and it's a higher end Gratitude with a full bar and a different menu than Café Gratitude. So, and that's actually what we just closed down in Newport Beach and reopened as a Gracias Madre.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I forgot. I have been to the downtown LA one too.
Yeah.
I was there a couple months ago. It's right across from Bulletproof Coffee.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So business has been, it's been an unbelievable experience opening Café Gratitude in LA. We opened March 4th of 2011, and it was like the most, it was mind blowing. We came to LA, and there was a seed vision in my mind that we were going to come to LA and we were going to bring a new cuisine to the mainstream, and we were going to bring a new consciousness of business to the mainstream. And, what I can say is that it feels like it's happened. It really, we've gone from the margins to the mainstream when it comes to plant-based, organic, health and wellness food. And some of the funny things, like when we first opened Café Gratitude, people asked me, is vegan a planet? They thought that was the name of a planet, vegan. I literally remember that. And then some people would ask me, how do you get milk out of almonds? And I would playfully say they've got little nipples, and if you grab a hold of them, you can get milk out of them. It's difficult, but it's possible. But now almond milk is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And even things like cold brew coffee wasn't a product on the market when we were serving it in Café Gratitude in the early days, and now it's like Billboard 7-Eleven. So it really is.
What's the deal with cold brew coffee? What's the purpose of doing it that way?
Low acid.
Oh.
So less difficult on the body because it's a much lower acid content in the coffee with the hot brewing versus the cold brewing.
Cool. I didn't know that. That's interesting. You know what? How I hacked the acidity of coffee was by making big crock pots of chaga tea. By taking just chunks of chaga that I would get on eBay. Mm-hmm. You can, it's like $50 for 5 pounds or something. Yep. It only takes a couple little nugs in the crock pot, and you have like a really thick, kind of dense brew. And so I'd use that as the basis of the coffee, and it's so much more smooth and alkaline. Because chaga is alkaline, so But because I love like this coffee right here is from the restaurant here, and it's super acidic. I like the bitter taste, but I can tell it's a little drying to the body. It has that sort of astringent element to it. So cool. Okay, so cold brew. So
so it just and again I think the for me personally, what it's provided is like, wow, when you have an idea and the timing is right, and you offer something, there can be a collective view change, which actually is what I'm going to talk about today. Is that the view change of plant-based vegan food from 15 years ago to now it's remarkable. The shift in consciousness of how much things have changed and how much something was in a complete, very, very marginal state of awareness, and now it's become part of the collective lexicon of understanding. So we opened. We have 7 restaurants in Southern California, the Café or the Gracias Madre in San Francisco. My dad's wife, my stepmom, has an oldest son who has a restaurant in Santa Cruz, which is called Grateful for Santa Cruz. That it's very like a Café Gratitude, but it's his own little, Santa Cruz, spin-off. It's called Grateful for Santa Cruz. And then we kind of have a handshake franchise with some folks out in Kansas City. There's a Café Gratitude in Kansas City that's actually been there for 7-8 years, and it's doing well. So that's that. And, as a business, we have some restaurants that are doing great and some that are struggling. My perception of that and how that has been is that I think we probably opened too many in the Los Angeles area, and we kind of diluted ourselves. And then while we were doing that, and while we were kind of ushering in this, conversation, obviously with many other people around plant-based, nutrient-dense, healthy, clean food, that became such a commonplace thing where even if restaurants weren't exclusively plant-based, they had a plant-based offering. They had a kale and quinoa bowl. They had, cold brew coffee. They had adaptogenic mushroom tonic lattes. They had, mac nut milk. They had, so many places have some components of that which we had done like a full package of. Now there's many people doing many and doing them well. And when you do something, we've done so many things. And it's hard to do so many things really well. When you do just a few things, you can easy to do those really, really well. And so I think, honestly, there's people that have done, little parts. And, I think that we've been an inspiration for many people. One, because, many people have shared that with me over the years. But, you do a little more focused food program or beverage program, and you can make it extraordinary. And I think we've tried to do so much that it's been difficult to keep innovating, as well as keeping consistent, as well as continuing to grow, which we've done 7 restaurants in the last 8 years. So it's been a labor of love, and it's been difficult. It's a restaurant business. I think everyone has the stigma and the knowingness that it's a difficult world, because you're interfacing with the general public and customer service and food. People are very particular about their food, and then employees, and having 650 employees, and the difficulty of creating an environment where people we really set out to, and I'd say that we really set out to be this kind of utopian business model, and in a lot of ways we've been successful. In a lot of ways we've fallen on our face. We have this principle within our business philosophy called sacred commerce, which is if you're a sacred commerce business, you have a path of profitability, awakening, sustainability, and social justice. And so those are the 4 layers or the quadruple bottom line that you're kind of navigating your business from. And in the Bay Area, for the first 7 years that we were open just in San Francisco, we were really focused on the ASS, but we weren't that focused on the P. And we say we made an ass out of ourselves because we got some lawsuits, and we had some economic downturn, and we ended up closing 6 restaurants in the Bay Area back in 2010 and 2011.
That would have been the fate of the Healdsburg spot.
That's right.
I went in, and then I felt like it wasn't there anymore. I was excited because it was really close to my mom's house, so I could get her food from there. So yeah, that's a lot of ups and downs, and I feel for you, because I used to work as a server for many years in the restaurant industry, and even just from that low level vantage point, it's quite a roller coaster. Let's talk about the plant-based phenomenon, and this is always something I'm very curious about, because due to the fact that when I got into healthy living and all this stuff in I guess it would have been like the mid 90s, I was unaware that there were healthy options of animal products to eat. I just thought you either are a vegetarian and you do the raw vegan or mostly raw vegetarian thing, or you have to eat factory farm meat or fast food. I didn't know there was anything in the middle, because I didn't know any farmers or going to farmers markets and understand that there's a natural way to raise animals that makes them healthy, and there are less and more humane ways to end their life and take their energy and put it in you. So I was vegetarian for, close to 10 years or so, and I've learned a lot about health since then. So I would say my vegetarian diet, due to lack of knowledge and due to the lack of availability of healthier vegetarian options, was largely comprised of very inflammatory grains, legumes, what are those silo stored, monocrops, eating a lot of corn and all this kind of stuff. And so my health was
corn, soy, wheat,
all that stuff. Yeah. And my health was just shit, So now, I've had people that are vegan advocates and plant-based advocates on the show, and I've had staunch ancestral paleo people, and I don't particularly have a sort of religious dogmatic view on what one should or shouldn't eat. I think eat whatever makes you feel good. I always say, go eat a bucket of rocks. I really don't care what other people do. I was going to eat what feels good to me, which changes from time to time. I mean, last night I was craving a salad so bad, but I also hadn't eaten much, so I got some bison spare ribs that were fantastic. So I got best of both worlds, but I now observe that they're, based on my own experience of being what you'd call plant-based for the most part for so long, that my health just fell apart. And I've met so many now, because of what I do and the people that I just meet on the street, recovering vegans, and recovering raw foodists who started, their teeth started falling out, and women that became infertile, and all sorts of crazy problems as a result of eating not my whack 90s version of vegetarian food, but the best that a plant-based diet has to offer now. Yeah. And so it seems to me that, close friends that I have, and in my experience, that any extreme diet like that, whether it's the carnivore diet or a raw vegan diet, seems more like a transitional, maybe a detoxing diet. The carnivore would be an elimination diet where you don't eat anything remotely inflammatory. You eat salt, beef, and water, right? And then all these people, including my brother, have all of these sort of autoimmune issues and inflammation. It just all disappears. And many people that do the raw vegan thing have those experiences too. And then after some time, I think those extreme diets seem to have their downside. So at this point in your personal journey with food and that of a restaurant, where do you see kind of the pros and cons of having animal foods as part of your diet or not?
Yeah, great question. So we, as a family, we were raised vegetarian, macrobiotic, miso soup for breakfast, hajiki seaweed, brown rice, beans. My mom's first company was called The Benevolent Bean, making tempeh, and little hippie business back in upstate New York. And so I was raised, I didn't, I ate my first, I've only had chicken maybe twice in my whole life. Once at
You're not really missing anything.
Once,
in my opinion.
And then I had my first hamburger at 35, and that was a hamburger from a cow that we had killed on our farm. That was part of my dad's greater understanding of how to manage a regenerative ecosystem on the farm. And we had one cow that was full grown, and we didn't have space for it on the farm, and we had one that had a blood disease. And so we ended up, instead of sending those cows to be slaughtered somewhere else, we said, well, they've been with us. Let's walk ourselves through this process and really be as present with it and conscious of it and appreciative of them, and make it quick and as painless as possible. And that was a big moment. I was weeping in tears, going through this process. And
were you present at the execution?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did they do that?
Putting a gun above the eye level, and then when they're not aware, and then
like a bullet gun, or one of the air guns. Okay,
gun.
Not the old No Country for Old Men, the air gun thing. They seem to use that with pigs a lot, from what I understand.
And the cow goes down, and it was very, very, very intense, and it was super confronting to face.
At being a vegetarian for 35 years, yeah, I bet. I want to run something by you, and I know my questions are sometimes very long, so just bear with me. It becomes conversational. I'm sure you're gathering that, and I want to get back to that. But just on that note of witnessing the life force from that animal leaving its body, and although, you know, I think the most humane way you could kill an animal would be a shot to the head unknowingly, you know, not chasing them and then shooting them, and witnessing that. And you said, you know, the crying, and I too, I'm like a huge softie. And when I was a kid, my dad was a big hunter, and I'd go out on the hunts, and I would cry when they killed bears and different animals. And I always hated fishing. I love fishing, but once you have the fish, then you got to bang its head on the rock and like kill it before you clean it. And I just was always mortified by that. Or I'd go out shooting with my BB gun, I'd shoot birds, and then I'd go up and see the bird dead, and I'd feel so guilty, you know. Mm-hmm. I personally think that the reason that we, people of our, you know, similar generation and cultures, the reason that we find that to be so painful is because as we were weaned and reared throughout infancy into childhood, that natural process of human life, the taking of other lives in order to sustain your own, was not something that we were subjected to because of the domestication of the human species, right? And, you know, you leave that to the butcher in the grocery store, and it's all very white glove, and you don't have anything to do with that integral part of human life as it relates to nature. Whereas, let's go back 15,000 years, or even, I mean, a couple hundred years, to be honest, if you lived in a rural area, kids like us, likely, rather than growing up vegetarian, depending on where we were in the world, would have seen grandma like hacking the heads off chickens all day long in the backyard. And we would have prior seen the men in the tribe come back with dead animals on the back of a horse, or dragging them through the woods, or we would have been tasked as kids going out and getting animals from traps and skinning them and cleaning them. And it's like, I think we're, again, my opinion and just a theory here, a philosophical viewpoint on this, is that the reason we see that as like a horror movie is because we grew up watching cartoons of animals being in human form with human voices and personalities. And then the only kind of insides of bodies we have seen have been in horror movies that are based on, you know, mayhem and torture. Yeah. And so we combine kind of our TV upbringing of cartoons, animals are our friends, with horror movies, and we've never seen the real thing in real life, where someone's just gutting a rabbit right there, and you're a baby nursing, you know, on your mom, and there's just blood and guts and broken up animals, and they become a stew, and you put them in the fire, and it's just part of life, to where you would perhaps have a reverence for the energy exchange of taking an animal's life. I mean, I'm imagining, you know, Native American traditions or something like that. It's not just like mindless, let's go kill a bunch of shit and throw it in the fire. It's all very thoughtful, I think. And so I think that's why that freaks us out. Yeah. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a great assessment. Two things I want to say. One is there's this really beautiful poem that Wendell Berry shares, which says, every day we must break the body and spill the blood of creation. If we do it knowingly, reverently, and carefully, it is a sacrament. If we do it with greed, gluttony, and carelessness, it is a desecration. And yeah, what I hear in that, and how that resonates for me, is that if we really got that our life is, you know, we belong to nature. Nature, we are a part of this living system that is this constant energy exchange of transference of energy. And we got that our life and our ability to live depends on the transference of that energy, which is that, food, whether it's, the transference of sunlight captured into a plant, or sunlight captured into a plant that's then eaten by an animal, that then we capture that sunlight that the animal captured from that plant. It's all a transfer of energy, and that if we're really connected to, wow, this life had to gave its life up such that I could live, and every meal is essentially that there's something is dying, and whether it's plants or animals, and even the production of plants creates the death of animals and species. So, the web of life is so much more nuanced and threaded together than we know, living in urban areas. So, that really was the big discovery for us. Was we started farming as raw food vegans, and we started a vegetable farm in Vacaville, California, to grow vegetables for our raw vegan restaurants. And we stopped being raw because we were cold on the farm. We needed some heat. So we started eating some cooked food. I can imagine. And then we needed some fat on our bones. And, we had a cow on the farm because we needed manure to, have vegetables grow.
Yeah.
And starting to interview farmers and, understand farming. And, the grandfather of biodynamics, Rudolf Steiner, and also the creator of Waldorf education, he said that, a natural farm is not a farm without a cow, because nature is not nature without animals. And so if we want to have farming mimic nature, it has to have the integration of animals. And in nature, animals are being, part of their role in nature is being recycled, their energy being recycled through the predator-prey relationship. And this is actually really beautifully communicated in this video called How Wolves Change Rivers. Have you ever seen this?
Yeah, I have.
It communicates this brilliant idea called a trophic cascade, where if one keystone species in an ecosystem is playing its right role, that there's a proliferation of more life that flows all the way through the ecosystem. And so basically humans introduced wolves back into Yellowstone National Park after maybe 50 or 100 years of them being exterminated. And by them being introduced back into the park, the whole thing, the ecosystem just becomes alive. It starts to regenerate and thrive because there was a stagnation and there wasn't a movement of circular energy that wasn't happening in that park, because the grass-eating animals had gotten lazy and multiplied, and were just tearing all the forage up and tearing the plants up from the roots and just hanging out in the valleys. And so that had been totally degraded, but then there was no fertilizer up in the upper sections because there was no animals up there. So that slowed down and started to degenerate. And then right when that reintroduction of those wolves, the whole thing, just so much more biodiversity comes back to life, so much more the trees start to, sprout up and get a lot bigger, and the whole thing just kicks into this amazing regenerative state. And so, one of the big visions of my life is that human beings could see themselves as part of nature and see that we are a keystone species that actually can be responsible for the regeneration of our planet, and that we can actually transform our assumption and way of being, which for this, for give or take 10,000 years of agriculture in many cultures, have really had this degenerative relationship with nature. That we take a piece of land, we plow it up, and we plant annual, grain crops. We do that for a couple years. It gets degraded. We have a term called leave it fallow, which means leave nature to heal it, because when we interact with it, it's getting worse, but we'll leave it fallow. Hopefully it heals, comes back to life, and then we can do that again. Oftentimes, it doesn't come back to life and we just move on. And there's actually a record of 21 or 20 plus civilizations that have collapsed because their inability to produce food, fiber, and fuel off of the ecosystem, off of the soil that surrounds that civilization, and in turn, the civilization perishes. And so we're, the kind of critical moment that we're at on planet Earth right now is that we're at that level where we've, in the last 40 years destroyed 30% of all the farmable land on the planet. And I think there's 34 million acres every year that become permanently desertified that once were land that was designed for agriculture. And so, we are right now, the current approach to agriculture is a very parasitic version of agriculture. And there's a paradigm shift to a new view, which is how human beings working land, managing land, can actually have a restorative or regenerative effect on that land and actually heal broken land. And actually animals are very important partners in actually doing that work. So
right now, if we just say eliminated all livestock from the food production process, we would turn that 30% desertification into 100% over time. Because if you don't have animals in the equation of growing vegetation, then what happens is you have to artificially populate the soil with growth factors, like we call fertilizers and such, right? So you have to artificially kind of prop up that soil that's now devoid of life supporting energies, because the animals and the things that feed off the animals' dewy, their poop, I forget, no one knows what dewy means except me and my top 3 friends. It's like short for deuce, without the animal deuce is about the field, and then the insects coming to eat the poop, and then the birds coming to eat the insects, and that whole, as you said earlier, like that whole circle of life. If you remove one component of that wheel, the wheel then collapses over time, and we prop it up with chemicals, essentially.
That's right. Yeah. So
I like to debunk things, and I think there's a lot of, especially younger people that haven't had as much time to research all this stuff. They just think like the whole world should just be kale and we'll all live happily ever after, and it doesn't work that way. So I like this. I love the message that you're bringing forth of this regenerative farming, where you're really kind of able to mimic a natural ecosystem, much like the Great Plains of the United States, when there were however many million of bison roaming free.
60 million.
60 million had lush grasslands that are now deserts because they got rid of the bison.
That's right. Yeah, I think there's a critical piece is that grasslands and prairies all over the planet co-evolved with the partnership of perennial grasses that grow back every year on the same rootstock, and grass-eating animals, herds of grass-eating animals, whether it's bison or gazelle or elk or, the many different grass-eating, grazing animals. And so it was actually the partnership of those grass-eating animals and those grasses that built that soil stock, that carbon stock of soil that are under, the middle of the country, that we essentially are now mining for that fertility that was built over many, many years of that partnership with those grasses and those grazing bison being moved by wolves. And it's actually the partnership of those two components that allow for annual agriculture to exist, and that we need, as Rudolf Steiner said, to have natural farming, we have to have the integration of animals, because that is the way that we can convert sunlight into grasses, into photosynthesizing plants. Animals can transfer that energy into manure, nitrogen, fertilizer that can then go into the system and continue to build soil versus degrade it, which right now most agriculture has a degenerative effect year after year. The soil gets less carbon, less ability for water holding capacity, less life in that soil, less biological life in that soil. And as you said, once we've destroyed the living organisms in soil, then we have to prop up that soil with synthetic fertilizers. And then once there's no life in the soil, just like our immune system, the soil system and the biology of soil is very much like the biology of our guts. So when we destroy the microbiome in our gut, we then need to that gives a lot of it gives a lot of functionality to our immune system. And so when we don't have that, we start to then need to be propped up with, other, synthetic medicines to basically stay healthy, because our body doesn't have the immune system to keep its, self healthy by itself. And this is the same thing with soil. So the more we degrade the soil, then the pests come in, the predation and the parasites and the different bugs will come in. They call them super bugs, and start to prey on those, and then we have to spray more chemical pesticides to keep those bugs. So it's a degenerative and the antithesis of a virtuous cycle. It's a completely degenerative cycle. We need the soil dies more, then we need more fertilizer, then we need more herbicide, more insecticide, and then the whole thing at a certain point collapses. Then we have to move on, and that's what that statistic of 34 million acres every year becomes desertified under mismanaged soils, and that's about the size of, I think, England every year becomes from land.
Oh, that's crazy.
In perspective. This is a crazy statistic. The United Nations states that we have 55 crops left on all of our conventionally farmland across the world. So that we have 55 years until our soil will no longer be able to produce a crop.
So going back to this idea in nature, the cyclical nature of the whole process of anything other than plants, because they have photosynthesis, therefore don't need to really destroy anything, although I guess it could be said that they're siphoning nutrients from the soil through their root system, but they don't take anything from the outside above ground, right? But everything else does. So if I am a lover of animals and I think that everyone should just be eating celery, and I buy some land and I go clear that land to make a celery farm, I'm going to be killing tens of thousands of creatures and their homes, from earthworms to snakes to gophers to birds to bats, grasshoppers, etc., right? So like nature's always fighting against us wanting to grow food. And so if I don't want to harm anything and just eat vegetables, that's very hard to do, because you can't unnaturally turn a plot of land into farmland without displacing or killing everything that's already there. So it's not a question, it's an observation of maybe a limited or hypocritical point of view, in that it's like, if you truly wanted to live a life where no harm is done, the Buddhist tenet, do no harm, I believe is what it is, you would have to kill yourself, because you really can't do anything or grow anything without things dying. And likewise, when we pass and leave our body with no intervention, if I just walk across that field right now and I die, those same animals that I've been eating are eventually going to eat my body, right? As it decomposes, buzzards are going to come and like rip off my elbow, and worms and maggots and all of those things. And I'm just going to become part of the soil and the ecosystem. And then my body will become the bodies of plants that other animals will come eat. And then other humans will catch those animals and eat them. And it really is like this cyclical thing. Likewise, if you grow some crops of broccoli and drive them down a freeway 5 miles, you're killing hundreds of thousands of bugs in so doing. It's like, in other words, I have this interesting observation that you can't even really move through space and time without at least bacteria dying that you step on or you're breathing in, So it's like, the question is, bearing all that in mind and taking the kind of politics out of it and taking the, the emotion out of it, like logically thinking, just completely emotionless, logically thinking, if we want to be the best stewards of the land, if we want to have the most conscious relationship we can with animals, and not animals in a sense of a hierarchy where we think killing a pig or a cow is wrong, but we're fine killing all the gophers to grow some vegetables. If all life is created equal, including the consciousness of plants, The Hidden Life of Plants, I think, is the book that shows that plants are in some way or shape sentient beings. So in the new model of mimicking nature, in this regenerative agriculture, how is that to be done, and how is that to be scaled? And within that system, are not creatures also going to be expendable to some degree to keep that system going?
Yeah, it's a great big question, and I just want to first say that I think being someone who lives in a city and choosing to be vegan and eat vegetables and organic vegetables and go for your farmer's market, I think it's a admirable and honorable path, and because in the realm of doing less harm, how do I, if I want to do less harm, I think there's, I don't want to participate in a CAFO, confined animal, concentrated animal feedlot operation situation where animals are being fed, more antibiotics than any other place antibiotics are going on the planet, but to, that livestock, poor grain that's, being grown with all kinds of crap. And the condition of those animals' lives is a holocaust. It's unbelievable. I think human beings, in the way that we look to some of the things that we've done in history, as appalled and ashamed of how we've behaved as human beings, and that we allowed for something to be that way. Animal agriculture today will be something that we will look back and go, wow, we're ashamed of how...
Like medieval times, yeah. Dude, there's that one farm on the 5 freeway, when you drive from LA to San Francisco, and you look out there and it's like, even if you're just semi-awake, you look at that and go, that's not right. There's just an intuitive hit that's like, animals aren't supposed to be living like that or being treated like that. They're just out living in the mud, just kind of moping around, and it's extremely saddening to see that kind of mistreatment. Totally.
So, I respect, and for the most part, I am plant-based. I eat mostly a plant-based diet. Eat, and again, I eat fish is probably the thing that I eat the most of, and I think where that comes from is when I was 12, I was a fly fisherman, and became really connected to being in nature, putting a fly, catching a fish, and seeing that fish as, nourishment for myself, and, being grateful for that fish and consuming that fish. And, I had that experience early on in my life, which gave me, again, as you said, I had permission and understanding that there was this cyclical relationship between, plants, animals, in this case, fish, for me. And again, I feel really good on a mostly plant-based diet. But that being said, I also am a advocate of, if we really dig into, because at one time I did think veganism was the truth, the way, the light, the answer. And I think it has a lot going for it, but it's missing a few, very essential understandings, which is really, as we talked about, how did those vegetables come to be, and did they rely on the death of animals, one page before we ate them, and we just didn't read that page, so we're like, we don't want to read page 1, we'll just read page 2, which is when the vegetable is, shows up at the grocery store, at the farmer's market, and that's when we eat it, and we're good, because that's what we, and this conversation gets a little bit paralleled to the story of the religious vegetarianism in India with the Hindu culture, and the fact that a lot of the higher castes and cultures in India who don't, or are vegetarian, but they love the milk. The milk is an essential nutrient for the culture and the cuisine. And, to get milk, we have to have, cows that are giving birth, and then oftentimes you have a male cow. And when you have a male cow, that's not going to be producing milk for you. So what are you going to do with it once it's full grown? And in Indian culture, oftentimes they're either given or sold to, the Muslim culture, or, someone who's not of the caste of Hindu that, holds the cow as sacred. But ultimately that cow is going to get slaughtered and turned into food or something.
Oh, that's interesting. Another piece to that I've always found interesting, and hold that thought. Yeah. I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to interject this really quickly, is when I was a vegetarian, I was never vegan, but as a vegetarian, and I just felt like, well, no animals are being killed for my sake. But I loved me some cheese, you know what I'm saying? Totally. And yogurt and all that, and butter, But then I had the realization one day, so those animals those cows that are making my delicious butter that I'm eating as a vegetarian, aren't being killed. They are actually eventually, but not in order to get that butter. But then I had the realization, dude, they're being constantly impregnated and in a prison for pregnant cows where this goo is being extracted from them every day. It's not much better of a life to be a milk cow than it is to just be a cow that's raised to slaughter and becomes prime rib. Anyway, just interesting observation that I had one day pondering such things. Carry on.
Totally. So I think the going back to the question of it's not as simple as we can just step out of the web of life and say, I'm not going to participate in death, because we are participating in death no matter what, whether we're eating vegetables or animals. And the kind of all right, well, what's the aspirational direction to go? And through the last 7 years and the building of a nonprofit that I co-founded called Kiss the Ground really has led me to understand the ecological functionality of Mother Earth, and really understanding the deep interconnection and the tie between plants, animals, soil, humans, the health of the atmosphere, the overall health of the planet, and how, as human beings, can we, go back to that term, be a keystone species that is facilitating with, that we have unbelievable awareness and consciousness of, what we can create. And understanding now through science as well as through indigenous wisdom of understanding, nature and the interconnection of nature, how can we operate and, put certain acupuncture points within the way we're managing a piece of land, such that that land can heal and regenerate based on us planting a certain biodiverse, combination of seeds or plants on that, us putting a certain biodiverse version of animals to integrate on that piece of land, us putting certain trees to kind of hold and bring, holding the earth such that there's not a erosion happening. There's ways that right now we manage land, completely destroy the earth.
Rape and pillage style,
but there's actually a way that we can manage land that has a healing and restorative effect. And that, to me, at the highest level, it came down to this insight of, plants photosynthesize carbon. They pull carbon out of the atmosphere, and they pump 30 to 40% of that carbon into the soil, feed microorganisms in the soil in exchange for water and minerals. And when those carbon and hydrogen carbohydrates go into the soil to feed microorganisms, that becomes stored carbon in the soil. And that essentially we can do a form of agriculture called regenerative agriculture that not only feeds the world but also cools it. And yes, there is life and death in that system, but there's life and death in that system in a balanced way where there's actually a continual net benefit, or there's a net increase of overall biological diversity in that system, and there's an ability for that soil to continue to produce forage and biodiverse plant life such that you can continue to feed animals, continue to feed humans, continue to feed all the different bees, birds, biological life that is part of that web of life. And that, what an amazing purpose in life to be creating a quilt of living systems on the planet that understand science, but also understand the intuition of, amazing cultures that have, come way before us, that essentially human life is about restoration and regeneration of our land, and that we can actually feed each other, that we can live in connection with living things, and that this can continue to go on for generations to come. Because right now, the prognosis of how we're going to feed ourselves and how we're going to live on this planet in 25 to 50 years is bleak. There's more energy going into how do we get to another planet than there is to regenerating and restoring our planet, that this beautiful piece of paradise that we have right now. And I believe that it is a fundamental mind shift, which actually sees that we can actually be a beneficial organism on this planet, and that we can actually restore and heal the damage that we've done thus far, and that the purpose of life moving forward can actually be participating in that healing and that regeneration. And that's what lights me up. And what lights me up is like, we can heal, yes, we all, it's like to witness a human being healing and seeing a human being, to witness a piece of land that's been degraded and to then see it coming back to life. Intuitively, I just can't think of a thing that would be a better collective project for all of humanity to get behind than restoring and bringing life, biodiversity, vitality back to this precious planet as like the number one game for human beings on planet Earth. And so, that's my game, is to awaken that message that that's possible and start guiding people to experts and processes and procedures and practices and people that are doing large-scale regenerative projects around the planet that you can see, wow, that went from 44,000 miles of desert to a complete, restored, beautiful ecosystem. There's a place called the Laos Plateau in China. In 13 years, they took a complete desert, 44,000 square miles, and turned it into a completely productive ecosystem, producing food and the abundance for that civilization that lives there.
Wow!
It's actually it's shown in the feature-length film that's due out in 2020 called "Kiss the Ground."
Oh, cool! You're working on that now?
Yeah, it's
tight.
It's almost done.
Great! I didn't even know that, because at the time of this recording, guys, we're in November 2019. Your interview will likely come out in February or maybe even March of 2020, so we'll be closer to
the film. Yeah, the film. It's narrated by Woody Harrelson.
Oh, dope!
And
that's great.
It's got an unbelievable,
Well, you have a lot of restraint in plugging your projects. We've been talking about all this, and you're like towards the end, yeah. By the way, I'm making this rad film about this. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because see the thing of, like, again, taking emotion out of it, which whenever I'm trying to, not like I have any power to solve a problem, but just when I look at a broad spectrum, complex, nuanced problem like caring for the land and managing to feed ourselves in a healthy way also, it's like, I think, all right, what makes sense? And what makes sense to me is usually going back in time before the advancements of, say, in this case, agriculture and industrialization. How would it have done before as we were living kind of on the land in a more harmonious way? But looking into the future in that way, I find it really exciting personally, just because, I mean, for just the reasons of having a heart and wanting people and animals and plants to be happier. But aside from that, I love fixing shit up. Like I don't watch much TV, but if I did, it would be the shows where they come into a crappy old house and remodel it. Or even those ones, I'm not even a car person, but where they take like a shitty old classic car and totally restore it.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm really into restoration, and I think I've done that many times in my own life, internally and in some ways externally. And so the idea of seeing that happen on a grand scale is really exciting, to just watch the forces of nature when we're working in harmony with those forces. You know, us kind of, as you said, being the keystone species that's putting some inputs logically here in that acupuncture sort of system, as you called it, and then to see nature and inertia sort of take over and start to, you know, go through the labors of healing itself with a little bit of input from us is super exciting.
Yeah,
that's just cool. I didn't see a before and after, but I think I was telling you yesterday, spent some time at Belcampo Farms up in near Lake Shasta in California, because that's where I get most of my meat, and I just felt like I would like to have a closer relationship with that process. So I went up there and visited their farm, went to the slaughterhouse and the whole thing. I was like, okay, I can live with this. But they had, I don't know, it's 18,000 acres or something. I might have the number wrong, but a substantial piece of land. And when they bought the land, it was unfarmable. And they did exactly what you're talking about. They just started rotating the livestock, and the birds follow the ruminants, and the insects follow the ruminants, and the birds follow that, and then they move them over here, and then more grass grows because of that thing. It's fantastic. And now their whole farm is just lush green grass and plants and trees. I mean, it's not a jungle climate, but it's as green as a jungle. I mean, it's just like everywhere you look, something's growing. It's just this incredible property that was not like that prior to their arrival.
That's right. Yeah.
It's so dope to see that happen. And then you have something for everyone too, because you can grow vegetables for the people that don't want to eat meat, you
Absolutely.
know, and then you can grow meat for people like me that I literally just don't feel right if I don't eat meat. And my body's just like, fuck you, you're not a vegetarian. I don't care like how spiritually connected I become. It's just not an option, you know? And
yeah.
I think like sometimes people say, what do you eat? And I don't really pay that much attention, but I would think, well, I'm plant-based. But those plants go through an animal first, and then they get to me, you know. If I eat a lot of vegetables, it wrecks my gut. Like, I'm just not a good digester of, especially raw vegetables. Oh my God. I mean, I can eat leafy greens, but if I eat like a bunch of raw veggies, my gut's wrecked. Too much cellulose, like too much fiber. It's just, it's a burden. But I can take down a giant ribeye and I feel like a champ, and like, just give me that. And that's all I need for a whole day, you know? So, I'm excited to kind of get into this approach, because it removes the kind of dogma and religion of like who's supposed to eat what and who the good people are and the bad people are and all that bullshit, and just like, cool, what's best for everyone, including all those animals, plants, and the future of the planet.
Yeah, so a couple things I just want to point out is that one of our big goals by 2025 is to train 25,000 leaders to be spokespeople on behalf of regeneration that can articulate the process of how the regeneration of land and soil works, such that you can be an educator, an advocate, and an activist in your community wherever you are. And so we do that online, and we've trained about 2,000 people in 25 countries in the last 12 months.
Oh, that's epic, dude. Wow.
And it's called the Soil Advocate Training. So
it's an online program?
Yeah, online program.
Wow,
so
that's amazing.
Inviting your listeners to participate if you're inspired by today's conversation. And then the other way that we're making a difference is we're training farmers over a 3-year transition program where we put a scholarship together. We pay for their education. We pay for their consultancy for the 3-year transition period, and pay for soil testing for farmers to be able to see their progress in heading towards this regenerative pursuit. And so, and our goal by 2025 is that we've trained 5,000 farmers by 2025.
Wow, that's impactful.
Yeah. So
that's a lot of acreage, assuming that said farmers, own
farmers,
some decent sized parcels of land.
Pieces of acres. Yeah. And one of the goals is to take the film and do a tour where we take the film out and share it in college communities, where we basically turn college students into advocates, into our advocate program, and then go to farming communities and show our film, and then offer scholarships, and people can sign up for an online training that could have farmers go through a 3-year transition program, and they wouldn't even need to do it with in the place where the trainers are training, that are maybe 2 states over. They can actually do it online. So we're in the process of developing an online portal for farmers to learn very, very from the best, not from us, because we're city slickers in Venice, California, but actually from the best regenerative farmers in this country who have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, and giving their education a beautiful online platform such that it can scale and have access to a lot more people quickly, and having the film be the calling card and inviting people to participate.
Oh my God, that's so epic. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's such a noble project. And I'm thinking about those farmers in the Midwest that are more concerned with feeding their family and paying their mortgage than they are saving the planet. But
totally.
In this model, I mean, the real selling point there is, like, if your soil's healthy, then you can get off subsidies, you can get off the GMO teat of having to buy those seeds, and that whole monopoly, just archaic, evil system that so many of our great farmers are locked into. That's, like, monetarily speaking, sounds like a really great way out.
Yeah, the farmer Gabe Brown, who's kind of a iconic regenerative farmer in this country, in North Dakota, he grows. He's farming about 5,000 acres, and he averages about $100 of profit per acre on his land, and the average American farmer averages, I think, between $1 to $2 per acre profit per year.
Oh my God, that is a really horrible business model. What the hell?
And Gabe Brown, and again, Gabe Brown is not about saving the world or reversing global warming. The thing that's so incredible about regenerating our soil is the amount of benefits. It's like such a win-win-win-win-win-win-win-win. All the impactful benefits that it provides. But he likes to keep it really simple, and he's like, we have a good motto on our farm. We like to sign the back of the check, not the front of the check. Keeps a lot more in your pocket.
I like that.
Essentially, yeah, he's been able to get himself completely off all subsidies, get him off all herbicides, all insecticides, all fertilizers. And, that's some of the biggest expenses in farming is fertilizers and insecticides and pesticides, is, all those inputs. And he's been able to, that's all a reduction of expense to, the farming economic model. And so really he's leading with, this is an economic win boost for farmers.
Totally. I mean,
it is.
Yeah. That's such a great selling point, as I said, when someone's just trying to make a buck and keep their game hustle going. You know what I mean? Of course, from my standpoint, not making money off growing food, my big win is that there's land around for, grandkids and things like that, but also just having access to food that's not grown with NPK fertilizers, with sewage sludge. I mean, I don't think people realize how shitty organically grown produce still is. I mean, it's way better than conventional, but it's gnarly, man. You got fluoridated tap water, in that celery and in those cucumbers and beets and watermelon, anything you're eating. I mean, the food supply is completely toxic, even in the organic side. Whereas in this model, if you can get rid of those inputs altogether, within a couple generations of that soil, I'm assuming you have, like, clean food. Yeah, assuming you have heirloom seeds and things that have some nutrient density.
Within 3 to 5 years, you can really transform a piece of land from a desertified, brittle, hardened, compacted soil to soil that's has life, that has the sponge is back. Water can infiltrate. There's biology in the soil. Then when there's biology in the soil, then you're able to get the nutrients and the minerals that are in the soil. Because I don't think we said this, but when you put something in your mouth, if you don't have the proper biology in your gut, you can't get access to those nutrients. In the same way, there can be all the nutrients in the soil, but if there's not the biology in the soil, then you're not going to get access to those nutrients.
Right, because the little microorganisms in the soil essentially eat and digest nutrients, minerals, and whatnot in the soil, make those able to be assimilated up into the plant, bioavailable to the plant, because the plant can't eat rocks, but the bugs can, basically. And then with the energy from the sun combined with the nutrients coming up through that living soil into the plant, animals eat that plant, further concentrating the nutrients from the soil, from the plant, from the sun, and then kind of up into us in the end.
That's right.
Or sometimes you can skip the third step and just eat a cucumber with having a turkey eat it first and then become Thanksgiving dinner, if that's not your thing. But that's a beautiful system, and I think anything that we can mimic like that in nature is amazing. I have one more question for you, because there's a lot of, around environmentalism. Isms in general kind of make me squeamish, because there's oftentimes ulterior motives behind those isms, and people funding isms that are less than integrous, like some of the carbon tax issues and things like that, which we don't have time to go into, that are kind of under the guise of perhaps doing the right thing for ourselves and for the planet. But meanwhile, there's big bad bankers that are putting these laws into place just to make more money off the populace and have a hidden tax and siphon our wealth over time and bring us into further servitude. There's that side of it. But then there is the other side of it, which is that we do care about the planet. We do care about our longevity and the environment that we're leaving for those that are going to come after us. But there's huge debates on both sides of the isms as to what wrecks the planet more. There's one documentary on Netflix right now that's says we get rid of all the animals and just grow plants, and I think some of these polarized movements that come out with the documentaries and the experts often disagree. And the big war right now that I don't exactly know what the answer is like, what uses up more water? What trashes the land more? Is it just that when we're doing the factory farmed animals, that those wreak havoc on the land? And is the same factory farm that's growing corn and soy and wheat doing less harm? You know what I'm getting at here? Is like, so we know what the solution is. The end goal is what you just laid out. But there's many people that say, if you raise one cow, it uses up thousands of gallons of water, and their farts are, causing global warming and all this kind of stuff. And all that sounds a little far-fetched to me at times and a bit radical. So what do you
I think,
do you know any of the stats on 1 acre of lettuce equals one cow, essentially? The way I look at it is you raise a cow, right? It's going to require a certain amount of water, vegetation, certain amount of land. But then the caloric net that you're getting out of that cow can feed more humans than the caloric net result of growing your kale or whatever. So I'm just curious about the math of how all that plays out in the current system and the way people are kind of butting heads about those things.
I don't have the exact, there's so much debatable data. I think Paul Hawkson calls it box data. It's information that we learn from our computer that just tells us, but there's so many nuances that aren't fully understand or sussed out in that kind of box data. So what I do know is that land needs animals on it to stay healthy. Otherwise, it, over time, degenerates. So before there was irrigation, there was rain, and there was grasses, and there was grass-eating animals that were grazing on that, being moved around by predators. And there's a lot of land that we can't use to grow vegetables on that actually is grassland that can be grazed, and we can have the restorative effect of grazing ruminants. And so clearly what I absolutely know is bad is growing monoculture corn and soy with synthetic nitrogen and then protecting that with synthetic pesticides, and that total degradation of soil and mining of soil life, and then feeding that very chemical intense food to a cow that eats that and then needs a lot of water to produce, clean, kill that whole system. It's a very energy resource intense equation. And I know that there's been, in the kind of vegan movies have come after, like, we wouldn't have enough land, we'd have to have cow, and I don't know what I know is that animals help land come back to life, and it's not about just no cows or cows. It's we need cows, we need grass-eating animals to bring, as I said earlier, in the last 40 years, we've desertified 1/3 of our agricultural land, and that land can't just come back to life by planting kale on it or putting, it needs a process. It needs it needs a stimulus of some water, some animal impact, some human design, and impact, and ultimately these areas like you talked about at Bel Campo, or our one of our mentors, Alan Williams, down in Alabama or Georgia, has 5,000 acres, who he's able to, in 3 years, was able to triple the forage on his land, meaning there was 3 times the amount of living vegetation, which meant he could have 3 times the amount of cows on that same piece of land.
Wow, that's crazy.
So, because when you have X amount of acres and every year you have more density of forage, then you can have more density of animals on that forage. And again, the way that you manage it is not you're not having 1 cow per acre. No, you have them together, and they move as a pod, as a herd in different regions to fresh new grass every day or every other couple days, and in turn that has that whole restorative effect. Does it require water in the beginning? Absolutely, but there's a lot of places where there's water falling from the sky, and there's other places where we do need to kick the system into gear with irrigation, but that's going to be necessary for anything that we're cultivating.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about, as you were speaking about the consumption of water, because that's a big concern with people, is, Central California almond farming, everyone, I'm going to drink almond milk because that's better for the environment. I'm like, really? You know where almonds come from? Like, they're one of the most depleting trees for water consumption. It's so interesting. But you could have that almond field, you could fill it with cows, and you'd be golden with the same amount of water because of the retention of water in the soil, right? As you start to get that sponge, I like how you described that layer, that spongy layer that holds in the irrigation water, the rainwater, wherever it's coming from, rather than it just kind of like...
Yeah, 1% increase of soil organic matter in soil can hold 20,000 gallons more per acre. So when you increase your soil organic matter, those carbons that are being pumped into the ground by 1%, you can hold 20,000 gallons more per acre. So again, there's this virtuous cycle as you pump. And again, I don't know that we made that big kind of overarching epiphany idea that essentially our food system, a regenerative food system, can not only take the carbon that's in the atmosphere causing global warming, climate change, 410 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, sequester, draw that carbon down through the living plants, trees, sequester it into the soil, and as it's sequestered in the soil, now that soil becomes spongy, and for every 1% of that carbon that's been stored, now we can hold 20,000 gallons more per acre of water. And when you have regenerative agriculture happening on land, you're able to on average farm, infiltration rates could be like 1/4 of an inch per hour. So because of soil being so compacted, whereas on a really well-managed regenerative farm, you can have 1/4 inch of infiltration within 3 seconds.
Wow, meaning the water seeping into the surface of the earth.
That's right.
So if we don't have soil that has the ability to have that sponge effect and let the water seep, then what's going to happen is we have runoff and erosion, because
that's right.
The ground is too dense and hard for the water to penetrate. It takes too long, so it ends up floating off into the periphery and then just being wasted, essentially.
That's right.
That's so interesting. Cool stuff, dude.
Yeah. So
it's funny. All this talking about all this farming is like 3 things are going on. I'm like, I need to get out and touch living soil. You know, the smell of soil, just that biological potpourri of life in really rich soil. I love like touching it and smelling the smell of soil, and I'm craving that. I'm also craving some spring water and another salad and perhaps another bison short rib. It's like making me hungry talking about the process of all this, and I just find it so fascinating. The last thing I wanted to cover, and we could just kind of touch on this because it's probably its own whole thing, but I was recently at an amazing resort/farm in Mexico called Cuixmala, and I went down there and did kind of a field report about this organization and how they do it. And they have a biodynamic farm, and they have 30,000 acres of a natural preserve there, UNESCO protected, and it's just absolutely fantastic ecosystem. And I got to spend a considerable amount of time one day with their head biodynamic farmer, and he took me on the whole tour and showed me how they collect the rabbit turds and put them in the soup, and like not soup you eat, but fertilized water for the plants. And he showed me his whole lunar schedule. I mean, it was mind-boggling, and it's like so spooky and woo-woo. You're going like, is this guy crazy? Then you taste the food, because all their food at that location is all biodynamic, and it's all grown there. And their other sister location up in the mountains, another hotel called Hacienda de San Antonio, and they do the animals, and then down in the lower land they do the fruits and vegetables and stuff, and they do the coffee up in the mountains. But I mean, not only do they just have great cuisine and their chef is fantastic, but the flavor of all of the food is just insane. And the life force of that food, it's just like you could blindfold someone who knows nothing about any of it and give them like some great Whole Foods market, organic vegetables, fruits, whatever, and then give them this biodynamic food from that farm. And it's just like, it just vibrates. It tastes so much better. It's so much more filling, so much more nourishing. You eat less. It's just magical. So do you think there's tell us from, your perspective, what biodynamic farming is versus traditional organic farming? And if you see that as having a place and being scalable within the regenerative model.
Yeah. And I've mentioned in this talk already a couple times Rudolf Steiner, who is the godfather of, or grandfather of biodynamics. And I would say that right now, in this moment, when we're looking for, okay, wow, I'm inspired by regenerative agriculture. How do I eat food from regenerative systems? Biodynamic is the clearest labeling certification that would say this food is produced in a way that has a regenerative effect on the ecosystem that it comes from.
Oh, cool.
So
that's
it really
good to know.
It really is the labeling for the current, regenerative agriculture is kind of moving into the space of food trends and conversations around food and how we can environmentally, make a difference on the planet, as well as feeding people in a healthy way. But biodynamics has really been the regenerative agriculture over the last, I don't know how many, 40, 50, 100, I'm not sure how many years it's been around. But the unique thing about biodynamics is it really has an aspect of esoteric spirituality to it, as well as astrology. and it really is about bringing the creative forces of the universe and kind of bringing those down to your piece of land, and calling for that wisdom and that intelligence of life, call it whatever you will, and having that creative force be present on your land. And so there's a lot of very interesting different kind of ceremonial or ritual aspects of it, of you spinning, making a compost tea and spinning the water that holds different biological preparations, some cow manure and some different things that have been aged in certain times, and you put it in, or some ash, and you put it in this and spin it 100 times to bring the circular cyclone energy from the. So there's a lot of very interesting, and I think there's varying degrees of the esoteric nature that people are practicing within biodynamics, and some people are super into that component. And I think at the more simple level, it really just sees that a farm is a living organism, and everybody is on the farm is a part of that living organism. And how do we create a restoration, a healing, and a continuum of more life on that piece of land based on our activity and action? Whereas the distinction between organic has really just become a list of what you can't do to a piece of land. Like, you can't use these 3 chemicals, but you can use these 5 chemicals. You can't use these insecticides. You can so it really, because it's in some ways, and again, organics is, it's beautiful, and I appreciate the standard of it, and that it has held a certain line, but it also the line has been slid based on, big corporate interest of getting into a big food game called, people interested in organic food. And so there's been a loosening of the standard of what can show up on an organic farm. And I think the biggest distinction is it really is just a list of what you can't do, whereas biodynamic or regenerative is a list of what you can do to have this restorative and healing component to your soil, which ultimately leads to restorative healing food that comes from that soil. And so when we first started farming on Bee Love Farm in Vacaville, which is where my parents live, we were running it as a biodynamic farm, and we've since adapted some. There's still some components of biodynamics there, and there's some other components of other different schools of thought inside of a regenerative agricultural system. But at this moment, there's not a regenerative certification. There's one in development called the Regenerative Organic certification, which Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's soap company has been behind pioneering.
Oh, word!
And
that's cool.
So that they're in kind of a beta test phase and should be to market with products probably in the next 1 to 2 years. That will be carrying the Regenerative Organic certification, which just uphold animal welfare, soil health practices, and fair trade, and fair compensation to farm workers. And so that's the Regenerative Organic certification. And there's actually a few other certifications in development phases around communicating and standardizing this articulation and this vision of regenerative agriculture, so consumers can participate and support it with their dollars. Because at the most exciting high level, when I got, wait, you're telling me that we can manage land and do agriculture in a way that heals and regenerates the planet and reverses global warming, and everybody can participate by feeding themselves and their families healthy food? That's a pretty compelling, I think most people, that's like a bipartisan, that's like everyone's down for that. And obviously there's lots of, complications and challenges and things that will get in the way of that. But at a very high level thesis, that was like, that thesis gave me hope and gave me something to live for and something to work towards and something to, something worthy to throw my life at. And so That's what I've become I playfully say I've become a minister for soil. I minister inspiration and insight and education around the importance of soil health and regeneration, because it would be a really exciting thing that if we could get a generation to get that we can be the regeneration generation, that we could actually play an active role in healing and restoring our planet through how we manage our land and how we create our food.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
If these mics weren't so expensive, I would drop them on the ground right now.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending time with me today, man.
Yeah.
I'm really glad we got to connect. And I'm glad like no one's come in the room and told us we're supposed to be anywhere. Like we got a really tight bow around this shit, which I love to do. You know, I don't like to leave any stone unturned in a conversation, especially one that's this potentially complex and big. So thank you for participating with me today, and I look forward to hearing your talk and hanging out more over the weekend.
And I look forward to introducing you today and
that's
getting
right.
to have this experience as the energetic information to how to communicate who you are for me and who you are for people.
Awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Well, I got one last question for you. It's a three-parter. So you've taught me and the audience a lot today. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings that you've learned from that you might recommend our students go also learn from?
Wow, great question. Well, one of my favorite books, my favorite early book is Siddhartha. So
that's some deep reading to do early.
Siddhartha Buddha is definitely one of my main mans. So was this supposed to be living teachers?
No, it doesn't matter. Teachers, teachings, philosophies, something someone could go look up and learn from. Yeah.
Yeah.
In any category of life.
In any category. Let's see. Number 2, what's coming to mind, and I was surprised that this is coming to mind, is the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I've felt beautiful. It's been an amazing, profound education, and always do your best. Don't take things personally. Don't make assumptions. And what's the 4th?
I don't
you
remember.
Don't know. Well, go get the book and find out that 4th.
Well, we'll just call it the 3 Agreements. I have it on my shelf somewhere, and I don't think I've ever read it in its entirety. I think it's one like, I'm supposed to read this. Everyone reads it, and I thumb through it, but I've not really dedicated myself to it.
Yeah. And then I would really say my mom and my dad. And my mom has a community in Maui called Lokahi, and she has a cool little living community where they're practicing living in community, connected to the land, and also share medicines from the earth. And she does something called Café Gratitude, which is a Sunday night supper club, and they sing songs, write songs in devotion to the earth and to caring for the earth. And she's been an amazing teacher in just flexibility and love and exuberance, and being mindful of our words, and that our words are spells, and that we're casting spells all day long, and to be aware of what spells we're casting. It's been a beautiful teaching from my mom. And then my dad, he's the founder of Café Gratitude with my stepmom, Tirces. And just the tattoo that me and him have say "Be Love" on our forearms facing ourselves. And just that love is an indwelling presence. It's not something found in another person or place or thing. And that we can always bring love to every situation, every moment, and every relationship is not based on am I getting what I want? Like that's going to be a lonely path, is thinking that I'm going to just try to get get love from another versus bringing and being the presence of love, and having a communion be the sharing of love that is indwelling and sharing that love with another. And that's kind of the game that I play with my wife and our marriage, and that we both hold the love internally, and we get to joyfully share it with each other. And I feel like I've learned that practice from my father, and he actually leads a workshop called Kindred Spirits, which is a relationship workshop, which is awesome. They do it at Esalen and on their farm, and our farm in Hawaii.
No way. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
I love those types of seminars.
Yeah.
I love Esalen too. Dope, dude. All right.
Yeah.
What about where can we find you? Anything you want to promote on website, social media, your film, any of that stuff?
So film coming out in 2020 called Kiss the Ground. It's really, the way I see it is there was a timeline for the inconvenient truth, and there's going to be a moment on the human timeline for Kiss the Ground when we realized that there was actually something we could do to restore and regenerate our planet. And it became like this awakening of land, soil, drawdown opportunity. And so that's out beginning of next year, and excited about that. And then you can find me, I'm love being Ryland. I love being myself, and I'm also a love being. And so you can find me on Instagram there, and at kisstheground.com, or at kisstheground is our Instagram. That's really beautiful if you want to get more inspired about regeneration, regenerative agriculture, and participating in any of our courses there. And then at Café Gratitude and at Gracias Madre, check out our restaurants, organic, plant-based restaurants in Southern California, not only nourishing people with healthy food, but really wanting to bring the conversation of gratitude to people's lives so that they connect over giving thanks versus maybe some complaint or something more mundane.
I might add, you might unknowingly be the producer of the best guacamole in the entire city of Los Angeles. And there's a lot of damn guacamole in LA. But the Gracias Madre chips of guacamole, mwah. Like the best ever. I mean, there's a lot of great things there, but that's something like hands down I'm always going to order. Speaking of your social media, shout out for your Kiss the Ground it was?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's another great account I'd like to turn people on to. I interviewed someone named Diana Rogers, who has, I think her blog is also called this, but her Instagram definitely is It's Sustainable Dish. And she's on a very similar mission of just spreading information about regenerative farming. And she's like very, very proactive, and also coming from the health professional perspective too, kind of like half farmer, half health enthusiast. So there's a lot of people kind of pushing this, this information forward, which I think is super exciting.
Yeah, no,
I'm stoked.
It's remarkable that 7 years ago when we started Kiss the Ground, there wasn't even really an agreed upon term, regenerative agriculture.
Right.
And now, as I said earlier, I think, top 20 food trends of 2020, regenerative agriculture is number one.
Boom.
So it feels good to feel, the momentum and the wave, but it really is the revolution and the generational revolution and regeneration that that's being asked of us. So I'm just grateful to be a participant and advocate and minister for soil and regeneration.
Right on, dude.
Yeah.
I'll see you back home in LA.
Awesome.